The following is a review for critical, analytical, and educational purposes only, and is protected under Article 17 and 107 in the United States Fair Use Code. This video is not an infringement on copyright. Please enjoy the video.
Last month I reviewed Sony's The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and suffice it to say, I did not really care for it. One of the big reasons was because it seemed to ignore 99% of everything that happened in the previous movie, as the characters were almost unrecognisable, the tone, the universe, and basically the entire direction of the franchise seemed to have changed off-screen. Sony were very vocal about their disappointment in how the first movie panned out, which is the reason for this massive change. Also, The Amazing Spider-Man 2's sole reason for existence was to set up future movies that hadn't even been written yet. The reason I bring this up is because X-Men Days of Future Past basically exists for the exact same reason, as 20th Century Fox were not happy with how the previous installments in the franchise have turned out, and they want to change the entire direction while also setting up future movies in the process. The key difference between these two approaches, however, is that X-Men Days of Future Past also wants to tell a story that can stand on its own, while also fine-tuning the franchise for the foreseeable future, and the result is nothing short of magnificent. X-Men Days of Future Past is not only hands down the best X-Men movie, but has instantly joined the list of some of the greatest superhero movies ever made. It's an incredibly profound, exhilarating, entertaining, and inventive blockbuster, and definitely the best comic book movie since The Avengers. The conceit of this movie is that in the future, the mutants have been hunted to near extinction by Sentinels, and instead of making a futile final stand, they quantum leap Wolverine into the body of his younger selves in the 70s to try and stop this war from ever happening. The resulting story takes some phenomenal twists and turns that I won't say much more about, but suffice it to say that I have not been carried by a blockbuster like this for some time. By the time Act 3 rolled around, I legitimately had no clue how they were going to resolve the main conflict, which kept me engaged until the spectacular finale blew me away with its effectiveness and sheer balls. Despite Wolverine being the catalyst for the story, he is hardly the main hero. In fact, he's actually pretty useless in many scenarios, mainly because this story takes place before he undergoes the Weapon X program, but he also takes a backseat to the story as this is a 3-mutant show. James McAvoy as Charles Xavier gives one of the best performances I've seen in a superhero movie in a long time. While initially him gaining control of his legs and losing his powers seems like his character arc in First Class is null and void, it's actually used to portray incredible depths for a morally complex character whose understanding of his own code has completely turned against him. Michael Fassbender as Magneto is still as complex a villain as he was before and is basically business as usual, and Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique, whose performance more resembles Rebecca Romijn from the original trilogy, and without spoiling too much for the movie, it really is her story, and Lawrence absolutely nails it. The supporting cast are brilliant as well, with Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen and Halle Berry returning and on top form, as well as some new mutants who don't get much development time, but you do still feel an emotional connection to them. Peter Dinklage is a great multi-layered villain, Ellen Page does well with a role that is essentially a plot device, and how awesome is it to see Iceman finally surf on his own ice, and the Sentinels look awesome, making for a brilliant threat, and Nicholas Hoult owns many of the scenes he is in as Beast. Oh, and as for Quicksilver, well, your move, Marvel, try and compete with that. The action and direction are spectacular as well. This movie is a masterclass of visual storytelling as well as using camera movements to convey mood in a blockbuster. There's even a great use of a 4:3 aspect ratio during key moments in the 70s, which seems to justify the existence of found footage more than 5 shitty Paranormal Activity movies combined. The score is great, the action is dynamic, with the highlights easily being Quicksilver and Blink, and by the way, after seeing Blink in action, I have a feeling that Bryan Singer might be asked to do a Portal movie come Monday morning. It really is that inventive and awesome. It may seem like I'm rushing through checklists for this review, but there's not so much I can say without going too in depth, but there really is so much to talk about here. Despite the effects and the blockbuster trappings, Days of Future Past is an incredibly emotional and profoundly complex movie in terms of its morals, its lessons, and its own approach to storytelling. The filmmakers know that fans were disappointed with the Last Stand and Origins Wolverine, so they've resolved to fix those mistakes. There's even a scene where young Charles sees visions of the future from those 2 disappointing movies, and he says that he does not want that future. It's a very meta moment in the movie. Essentially, this film is about fixing the mistakes of the past to make a better future. One of the most profound moments of the film involves the Magneto of the past committing terrible acts, with the Magneto of the future talking about his regrets and the insecurities that he once held in his darker past. I cannot wait to give this movie an in-depth review someday, because there's just so much under the skin of this film that cannot be done justice in a mini spoiler-free review. But this movie has some of the best storytelling in a comic book film in the history of the subgenre, and its ending sets up an incredibly bright and interesting future for the franchise that I simply cannot wait to revisit. In a year filled with blockbuster abominations, disappointments, and even feeling underwhelmed at points, I can safely say that this is the first true must-see blockbuster of 2014. X-Men Days of Future Past is a staggering achievement for the genre, and even Marvel Studios should be taking notes from this film. Hyperbole does not exist here, and I loved almost everything about the movie. And as a result, I give X-Men Days of Future Past 5 stars out of 5.
All those years wasted fighting each other, Charles.
I've watched a lot of people die. Friends.
We've been given a second chance.